Something changed the night she entered the palace. The palace saw them, and nothing remained hidden. A queen who does not forgive, a kingdom built on order, and a prince willing to risk everything.
But the one no one expected to decide was her. She chose to walk away, to protect a love that could destroy them both. This is The Secret Love of the Prince, Part 5, The Price of Love.
That night, the palace did not sleep. Not truly. Though the torches burned low and the grand halls grew quieter, something restless lingered beneath the surface, something alive, moving through whispers, glances, and half-spoken suspicions. Urenna felt it everywhere. As she walked beside Prince Chidera through the dimly lit corridor, the weight of unseen eyes pressed against her skin. Servants bowed as they passed, but their curiosity lingered a moment too long. Guards stood at attention, but their silence carried awareness. The palace knew. Not everything. But enough. And that alone was dangerous. "This cannot continue like this," Urenna said softly, her voice barely rising above the echo of their footsteps. Chidera glanced at her, his expression firm. "It already has," he replied. "And I do not intend to stop." She shook her head slightly. "You are not listening. And you are afraid," he countered. "Yes," she said, stopping abruptly. That alone made him pause. "I am afraid," she repeated, her voice steadier now. "Not of them. Not even of your mother." She looked up at him. "I am afraid of what this will turn into." The silence that followed was heavy. Because deep down, he understood. This was no longer about stolen moments or quiet laughter beneath the trees. This had become something else. Something bigger. Something that could not remain hidden. And once something like this was seen, it could not be unseen. Far from them, within her private chambers, Lady Somtochukwu sat before a polished mirror, her reflection calm, composed, and utterly focused. A maid stood behind her, carefully adjusting the folds of her attire, but Somtochukwu barely noticed. Her thoughts were elsewhere. With them. With what she had seen. With what it meant. "Leave," she said quietly. The maid bowed and exited without question. The moment the door closed, Somtochukwu's expression changed. The softness disappeared. What remained was calculation. "They are stronger than I expected," she murmured to herself. Not just the prince. The girl. That was the problem. Urenna was not behaving as she should. No desperation. No greed. No visible ambition. Which made her unpredictable. And therefore, dangerous. Somtochukwu rose slowly, moving toward the open window. Below, the palace grounds stretched wide, illuminated by flickering torchlight. Somewhere out there, they were still together. And that thought alone stirred something sharp within her chest. "This cannot be allowed to grow," she said softly. "Because if it did, it would not just be a distraction. It would become a challenge. To her. To her position. To everything she had quietly been preparing for." Her fingers tightened slightly. "No," she whispered. "This ends now." And unlike before, this time, she would not rely on whispers. The next morning arrived with a deceptive calm. Sunlight poured into the palace courtyard, illuminating marble floors and golden pillars as though nothing had changed. But everything had. Urenna stood beside a carved stone railing, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon beyond the palace walls. Freedom lay somewhere out there. Simple. Quiet. Untouched by power and expectation. "You are thinking of leaving." She turned. Princess Adorgo stood a few steps away, her posture regal, her gaze sharp but not unkind. Urenna hesitated. "I am thinking," she replied carefully. Adorgo studied her. "You are wiser than I expected," the princess said. "Most in your position would already be dreaming of what this could become." Urenna gave a faint, almost sad smile. "And what is that?" Adorgo's expression did not soften. "A disaster." The honesty of it hung between them. "I do not want that," Urenna said. Wanting has little to do with what happens here, Adorgo replied. Things move because they must, not because we wish them to. Urenna looked at her closely. And what do you want? She asked. For a brief moment. The princess did not answer. Then, I want my brother to remain who he is meant to be, she said quietly. And if who he is meant to be is not who he wants to be? Adorgo's gaze hardened slightly. Then he will learn the cost of that. The words were not cruel, but they were real. And that made them heavier than any threat. Later that day, the palace gathered once again. But this time, there was no announcement. No formal call. Only a quiet understanding among the nobles that something was about to unfold. They came anyway. Drawn by curiosity, by anticipation, by the unspoken promise of conflict. Urenna felt it the moment she stepped into the grand hall. The attention. The weight of it. This time, it was not hidden behind whispers. It was direct. Open. Watching. At the far end of the hall stood the queen. Beside her, Princess Adorgo. And just slightly behind, Lady Somtochukwu. Waiting. Prepared. Chidera entered moments later, his presence shifting the air instantly. His eyes found Urenna. And for a brief second, everything else faded. But only for a second. Because then, Lady Somtochukwu stepped forward. My queen, she said, her voice clear, controlled, impossible to ignore. I request permission to speak. The queen regarded her carefully. Speak. Somtochukwu inclined her head slightly. There are matters that, if left unaddressed, may bring dishonor to this palace, she began. The room stilled. Because now, there was no hiding. No subtlety. This was no longer a whisper. This was an accusation waiting to take form. And everyone knew exactly who it would fall upon. Urenna felt it before the words were even spoken. The shift. The direction. The inevitable pull of attention toward her. Lady Somtochukwu turned slightly, her gaze settling not harshly, not openly cruel, but with a precision that left no doubt. There are those who enter places they do not belong, she said calmly, her voice carrying effortlessly across the hall. And in doing so, create confusion where there should be order. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Chidera's expression darkened instantly. But he did not interrupt. Not yet. Somtochukwu continued. This is not a matter of affection, she said. It is a matter of position. Of understanding one's place within the structure that holds this kingdom together. Her words were sharp, but controlled. Carefully crafted to sound reasonable. To sound justified. And when that understanding is absent, she added softly, it becomes necessary to restore balance. Silence followed. Heavy. Expectant. Because now, the moment had come. All eyes turned. Not to the queen. Not to the prince. But to Urenna. And in that moment, she understood something with absolute clarity. This was no longer about love. This was about being tested. Measured. And either broken or proven. The weight of their gaze pressed down on Urenna from all sides. It was no longer subtle. No longer hidden behind polite curiosity or whispered speculation. This was direct. Deliberate. Public. She could feel it in the stillness of the room, the way every breath seemed to pause, waiting to see how she would respond. Lady Somtochukwu had not called her name. She had not needed to. The implication alone had done its work. And now, the entire palace watched. Urenna slowly lifted her head. Not in defiance. Not in pride. But in quiet steadiness. I did not come here by my own will, she said. Her voice was not loud. But it carried. Clear. Unshaken. A ripple passed through the hall. Lady Somtochukwu's expression did not change, but her eyes sharpened slightly. Urenna continued. I was brought here under the Queen's command. That shifted something. The weight of the accusation, so carefully placed, faltered just slightly. But Somtochukwu recovered quickly. And yet, she said smoothly, you remain. The words slid through the air like silk, and cut just as deeply. Urenna did not flinch. Yes, she said. That single word drew even more attention. Because there was no denial. No attempt to retreat. Only truth. I remain because I have not been told to leave, she added. The simplicity of it unsettled the balance again. Because she was not fighting like they expected. She was not pleading. She was not shrinking. She was standing. And that, more than anything, made her dangerous in a way none of them had anticipated. A faint smile touched Lady Somtochukwu's lips. Subtle. Controlled. But edged with something sharper. You speak well, she said. For someone unfamiliar with the ways of this court. A few quiet murmurs followed. Encouraged. Curious. Watching. But words alone do not change reality, she continued. Nor do they alter what is appropriate. She took a slow step forward. And what is appropriate, she said, her voice lowering slightly, is that boundaries are respected. Chidera moved then. Not aggressively. But deliberately. Enough, he said. The single word carried weight. Authority. But also warning. Somtochukwu turned her gaze toward him, unshaken. Your Highness, she said with a slight bow, this concerns more than personal feeling. It concerns my name, he replied. Which makes it my concern above all. The tension shifted again. Now it was no longer centered on Urenna alone. It had widened. Expanded. Pulled him into it fully. And that was exactly what Somtochukwu had intended. Then perhaps, she said carefully, it is time that your name is protected from misunderstanding. The word lingered. Soft. But heavy with implication. Chidera's expression hardened. There is no misunderstanding. Then there is clarity, she replied. And for the first time, there was no softness left in her tone. Only challenge. The Queen, who had remained silent until now, finally stepped forward. And the room obeyed instantly. Silence fell. Complete. Enough, she said. Not loudly, but with a finality that ended all exchange at once. Her gaze moved from Somtochukwu to Chidera, and finally, to Urenna. There was no anger in her expression. No visible irritation. Only something far more difficult to face. Judgment. This matter has gone far enough, she said. No one disagreed. Because no one dared. She took another step forward. This is not a question of emotion, she continued. It is a question of order. Her eyes remained on Urenna. And order must be maintained. The meaning was clear. Even before the words were spoken. A quiet tension built in Urenna's chest. Not fear. Not panic. Something else. Acceptance. You will return to where you came from, the Queen said. The words fell cleanly. Decisively. Like a blade. A soft murmur spread through the hall. Because though many had expected it, hearing it made it real. Chidera stepped forward immediately. No. The word came sharp. Immediate. But the Queen did not look at him. This is not a request, she said. And that changed everything. Silence followed the Queen's declaration. Heavy. Unforgiving. Chidera stood still for a moment, the weight of what had just been said settling around him like something physical. You would send her away, he said slowly. Now the Queen turned to him. I would restore what should never have been disturbed. His jaw tightened. She is not a mistake to be corrected. And yet, the Queen replied calmly, her presence here creates imbalance. The word again. Balance. Order. Structure. Everything this world was built upon. And what of what I want? He asked. The Queen's gaze did not waver. What you want, she said, does not stand above what must be. The finality in her voice left little room for argument. But Chidera did not step back. Not this time. Then perhaps what must be, is wrong. A collective intake of breath moved through the hall. Because once again, he had crossed a line. The Queen's eyes hardened slightly. You speak as though you are prepared to face the consequences of such thinking. Chidera held her gaze. I already am. The tension rose sharply. Because this was no longer controlled disagreement. This was something far more dangerous. Something that threatened to break beyond words. And in the center of it all, Urenna stood quietly, watching, understanding, realizing that if this continued, it would not end with words. No. The voice was soft, but it cut through everything. Urenna stepped forward, and in that single movement, the entire room shifted again, because she was not supposed to interrupt. Not here. Not now. Not like this. But she did. And somehow, no one stopped her. Her eyes moved first to the queen, then to Chidera, and finally, to the space between them. This ends here, she said. There was no trembling now. No hesitation. Only clarity. Chidera turned to her. Urenna. But she shook her head gently. Please. That one word held everything. A request. A plea. A decision already made. She looked back at the queen. I understand what you are protecting, she said. And I will not stand in opposition to it. The queen studied her carefully. Silent. Waiting. Urenna continued. I will leave. The words landed heavily, not because they were unexpected, but because of how willingly they were given. Chidera's chest tightened. No. But again. She did not let him finish. This is not defeat, she said softly, though her eyes shone with something deeper. It is choice. And that choice changed everything. The silence that followed Urenna's words was unlike any that had come before. It was not the silence of anticipation, nor the silence of tension waiting to break. This was something heavier, something final. Because for the first time since all of this began, a decision had been made, and it had not come from the throne. It had not come from power. It had come from her. Chidera stared at her as though he had not heard correctly, as though if he looked long enough, the words would change. You cannot mean that, he said quietly. But Urenna did not look away. I do. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, and that made it harder to fight. This is not your burden to carry, he continued, his voice tightening. You do not have to. I do, she said softly. That stopped him. Because there was something in her tone that could not be argued with. Not forcefully. Not without breaking something fragile between them. I will not be the reason you stand against your mother, she added. That is my choice, he said immediately. And this is mine, she replied. The words met, clashed, but did not overpower each other. They simply existed, side by side. And that was what made it unbearable. Chidera exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair as though trying to hold onto something slipping beyond his reach. This is not how this ends, he said. Urenna's lips curved slightly, not in happiness, but in quiet understanding. No, she said. It is how it begins. From where she stood, Lady Somtochukwu watched the exchange with careful attention. Every word, every pause, every look that passed between them. And though the outcome should have satisfied her, it did not. Not completely, because this was not destruction. This was not the breaking she had intended. This was something else. Something far more dangerous. They were choosing separation, but not surrender. And that meant, this was not over. Her fingers curled slightly at her side. That will not be enough, she thought. Because distance could be bridged. Time could be endured. And feelings like that, they did not simply disappear. No. If this was to end. Her gaze shifted briefly toward the queen, then back to Urenna. And for the first time, a new thought formed. One colder than the rest. If she leaves, she must not return. The idea settled quickly, naturally, as though it had always been waiting. Because as long as Urenna existed within reach, there would always be a possibility. And possibility was the one thing Somtochukwu could not allow. A faint smile touched her lips again. But this time, it held no elegance, only intention. The queen regarded Urenna in silence for a long moment, as though weighing something beyond what had been said, beyond the situation itself. You understand more than most, she said finally. It was not praise, but it was not dismissal either. Urenna inclined her head slightly. I understand enough. The queen studied her a moment longer, then gave a single, decisive nod. You will leave before nightfall. The instruction was clear. Immediate. Final. There would be no delay. No room for reconsideration. Something in the hall shifted again. Because now, it was real. Not a threat. Not a possibility. An outcome. Chidera's hands clenched slightly at his sides. But this time, he did not speak. Not because he agreed, but because he understood. Anything he said now would only make it harder. For her. And perhaps, for himself. The queen turned away slightly, signaling the end of the matter. But before the moment could fully dissolve, make sure she is escorted safely. The addition was calm, measured, but it carried weight. Because it meant something. Not kindness. Not quite. But acknowledgement. Urenna bowed her head slightly. Thank you, Your Majesty. And just like that, the decision was sealed. The hall began to disperse slowly. Voices returned in hushed tones. Movements resumed. But the air remained thick with what had just occurred. Urenna turned slightly, preparing to leave. But before she could take more than a step. Wait. Chidera's voice. She paused. Closed her eyes briefly. Then turned back. He was closer now. Too close. Close enough that the world around them faded once again, despite everything. You cannot just walk away like this, he said. There was no anger. Only something deeper. Something raw. I am not walking away, she replied softly. It feels like it. That is because you are still looking at it as something that is ending. And you are not. She shook her head slightly. No. A pause. Then. I am protecting what we have, the only way I can. The words struck deeper than anything else she had said. Because they were not about distance. They were about preservation. Chidera searched her face, as though trying to find another answer hidden beneath the one she had given. But there was none. Only truth. Painful. Unavoidable. And real. By the time the sun began its slow descent, the palace had already begun preparing for her departure. Quietly. Efficiently. Without ceremony. As though this were something ordinary. Something routine. But it was not. Not to her. Not to him. At the far edge of the palace grounds, a carriage stood waiting. Simple. Unmarked. Ready. Urenna stood before it, her small belongings already placed inside. The world beyond the palace stretched before her once again. Open. Free. And yet, heavier than it had ever been. Behind her, footsteps approached. She did not need to turn to know who it was. I will find you, Chidera said. No hesitation. No doubt. Just certainty. Urenna closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. You should not. But I will. A pause. Then she turned. Slowly. Meeting his gaze one last time. And in that moment, everything they had not said passed between them. Every promise. Every fear. Every possibility that now lay uncertain ahead. Then make sure, she said softly, that when you do, it is not to lose everything else in the process. The words stayed with him, even after she turned. Even after she stepped into the carriage. Even after it began to move. And as the gates of the palace of Alaezi closed behind her, one truth remained. This was not the end. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous.
She walked away. Not because she stopped loving him, but because she loved him enough to let him go. In the palace of Alaezi, love is never simple, and every choice has a price. But what none of them realize is this: some decisions do not end a story. They begin something far more dangerous. And what is coming next will change everything. If you think this is where it ends, you're wrong. Because what happens next will test love, power, and loyalty like never before. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss part 6. And tell me in the comments, did Urenna make the right choice?